Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a lead fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Cicchetti. I'm really excited because today I have even another podcast host, but Ron's also the CEO of EarthKind Energy Consulting. He's been real active in the really greater New York area and beyond when it comes to clean energy, clean tech, renewables, and more. So just ready to kind of unpack his story and just see where it all started. So Ron, how you doing today?
Doing great, Charlie. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Well, you came recommended. You're here now. We'll talk about New York, one of my favorite places, even though I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. And I ask all my podcast guests, Ron, take us back. Where'd you grow up and go to school?
So I grew up in a suburb of New York City, actually in Queens, and lived there till I was 15. We used to go out to Long Island for summers, and then eventually my parents built a place, and we moved out there when I was 15. Lived there till I was 18, then went to college in upstate New York, in Binghamton, New York, if you're familiar with Binghamton, which I wound up doing my undergraduate there in accounting and a graduate in systems science. Talk about that at some point if you like, but basically came out of that, wound up falling in love, married a woman who had a kid, had a couple kids, started my career in Binghamton when, I was not very conscious of green stuff at all, really, growing up. And I wasn't very active socially, politically, that sort of thing, until there was this little war in the Middle East. And all of a sudden, I had been the last generation, the last year or two, registered for the draft, and then it had gone away for a while. There was no registration, there was no draft, and then all of a sudden the draft was reinstated, and I had 4 younger brothers, and that crack opened up in my consciousness about, wait a second, where are they going? What are they going to be dealing with, and why? And it was all about oil. And all of a sudden, the more I looked, the deeper it got, and it was realizing that fossil fuels control so much of what we do and has such an impact on the economy and the environment and everything else. And I started becoming active. And the more active I got, the more I realized that, it really takes all of us to make the types of changes that we need if we're going to have a future for our kids. And first I got into energy policy back when utility rates were going up 25% a year, 18% a year after year, because they were phasing in the nuclear power plants at the time, if you recall that. And there was, I had actually worked at one at the Shoreham nuclear power plant on Long Island as a college student. I had been a security guard, and until that point, I had been very supportive of nuclear. And then I kind of saw the inside, the ugly underbelly from working there. And then the cost just kept going up. So $1 billion plant went to 2, went to 4, at 4.2 as part of an effort to get a consumer cap on it. At $7 billion of cost overruns, finally that plant bankrupted what was then the Long Island Lighting Company. They got taken over by the government. They almost bankrupted other utilities, a bunch of nuclear plants. And I realized that, the problem with all this fossil fuels and with things like nuclear is that they're very cost excessive and cost always increases. Whereas when you take a look at the renewables, the great thing about the renewables is that once you build the infrastructure, all you have to do is maintain it. And the water flows, you get free electricity. The wind blows, you get free electricity. Sun shines, you get free electricity. And then underneath our feet is this heat that the earth has been absorbing for billions of years. And you go down 4 or 5 feet and you get a constant 55 degrees temperature that you can tap into. And all of a sudden you get very cheap heating and cooling too. So the answer to a lot of our economic, environmental issues really I found is energy. And I realized that my mission in life was energy, the environment. And it's been a fascinating kind of ride. I've really enjoyed all the different things I've been involved with. And it's an exciting time now. We're really at a crucial crux in transitions. But, since the time I started, I was first involved in policies, working to get good policies in place, then rolled out programs that those policies had helped put into place. So things like wind energy and solar energy. Became the president of the Solar Industries Association in the state, helped get some changes there. But then for the last 2 decades, I've really been working with property owners, commercial buildings, nonprofits, government, figuring out how they can make transitions to clean energy that would have an environmental benefit, but really their main goal was to reduce cost. And the great thing about these technologies now is that you can almost always structure a deal that saves people money. So save money, save the environment, and do well for your kids, and all of a sudden we all feel good. So.
Man, that's one of the better ahas I've heard. The energy independence, the war, the cost. You got into it for those reasons. Everybody can get into this green movement maybe for different reasons, but I can tell you've now really built a career around it. So it's encouraging. And I'm a big fan of mentors. Is there anyone that maybe opened some doors along the way or you looked up to?
Yeah, so, I was lucky enough, in 1989, I had been working for about 10 years in energy and environmental policy, doing a lot of work. And I was in Binghamton. I had been the regional director for about a 90-mile radius outside of Binghamton for a bunch of years, for basically 10 years. And I had decided it was time for me to move on. And I, for some reason, came in contact with the Earth Day people who were building for Earth Day 1990. And that was the 20th anniversary of Earth Day. And it wound up being, a billion people across the planet were ultimately getting involved now in Earth Day events. At that point, it was a couple 100 million. But I had New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware were my territories. And I came across a guy who was leading that up, who was the original founder of Earth Day, who's still involved now to this day. And that's a guy named Dennis Hayes. And Dennis, if you take a look at his history, he was recruited. He dropped out of college for a while to run the Earth Day, to help organize the Earth Day events. Became, it is the largest non-religious event in the planet where you have 1 billion people, 1 in 8 of us, participating in Earth Day events. So I think it's a tremendous testimony to both Dennis and to all the folks that have worked with him, and then to all of us to realize that, it's a small planet, and we got to have the ability to be able to breathe the air and drink the water and feed our kids and not kill ourselves along the way. And that's what Earth Day is all about, and that's what Dennis Hayes has built his life and career about. So I really look up to Dennis. There's a bunch of other folks too, but Dennis was definitely one of my mentors and a great leading example.
That's amazing, man. Thank you for telling us that story and connecting those dots. Well, let's talk about kind of present day and what's keeping you busy at EarthKind. Your entrepreneurship there, 23 years. So tell us a little more about your company, some of your main clientele projects, and what's a day like today for you?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. So EarthKind is a small boutique consulting company. So what we look for are clients who want to tap into the opportunity to save really a dramatic amount of money. I mean, everyone's feeling the crunch these days with energy, right? So we work and, we've diversified over the year. We started out working originally in energy efficiency. So things like light bulbs, right? So you take a 100-watt light bulb and you change it out with an LED, and now all of a sudden you get an 80% savings. Hey, still the same amount of light, but you're using 80% less energy efficiency. What a novel concept, Great thing. So the first thing is a guy named Avery Loverns out of Rocky Mountain Institute has said is, the cheapest energy is the energy we don't use. So one of the things we do is with clients is first take a look at efficiency, and I do that with clients across the board in terms of what they can do to first reduce the amount of energy that they're consuming without compromising their comfort. So energy efficient lighting was one big area, and worked with everyone from the World Bank through Military Sea Lift Command and a host of for-profit companies over the years to make stuff happen. Currently doing work with the Troy Housing Authority on looking at efficiency opportunities. But then in addition to efficiency, you still have to get that energy from somewhere, right? And when we talk about energy, there's really 3 aspects of energy that we work with different clients on, some on all of them, some on a few of them. And that's everything from clean electricity, things like solar electricity or bilateral deals for wind energy off-takers. But mostly solar is kind of the thing, because solar is now so cheap. The prices have come down so dramatically, and with all the incentives out there, almost anywhere in the world now, you can find the ability to make solar a cost-effective opportunity if you have the ability to put everybody together to make it happen. So we bring all players together depending upon whether somebody has capital, doesn't have capital. We look at solar opportunities, sometimes solar with battery storage when that makes sense. Its battery prices are coming down. But the first thing we take a look at after efficiency is really how can we get the electricity that people need in a better, cheaper way that's also carbon reducing. Next, we take a look at the heating and cooling systems and hot water systems, because many places that can be as much as 2/3 of folks' bills. At the very least, it's 1/3 of most operations, most buildings is in the heating and cooling cost. And we take a look at what can happen there, first on the efficiency side. But now with the clean energy technologies that are out there, you can take things that like a central air conditioner, for say, right, which is really a heat pump. The air conditioner compresses and expands a gas and dumps the excess heat out and then gives us cool air into our buildings. Cold climate air source heat pumps are really air conditioners. They do the same thing during the summer. They do that same compression, expansion, and give you cool air in the summer. But they also take heat out of the air now down to minus 15 degrees and provide heat. So you have an air source heat pump that is an air conditioner, but is also a heating source. And that technology has also evolved. It's just come so far, the costs have come down. So it's almost always cost effective. If you're going to replace your air conditioning system or put in a new air conditioning system, you want to go with a cold climate air source heat pump. In this part of the world, you want to go with an air source heat pump wherever you are in the world. Or if you can do it, and this is where I get really excited, is tapping into ground source heat pumps or geothermal heating and cooling for that aspect. So when you do that, what happens is you're drilling holes, and you can drill those holes, you can drill those pipes horizontally under a parking lot if you're building a parking lot or redoing a parking lot. You can put it in a pond or a lake if you happen to be near one, or you could just drill straight down. So even people that live on a little postage size stamps, like my good friend Scott Sklar in Virginia, who was the president of the Solar Energy Industries Association, he has a little plot in Virginia. It's really just a lot. But even on that lot, you can drill straight down under your footprint of your space and provide all the heating, cooling, and hot water for that building. And interestingly enough, is you can actually do that on the footprint of any building and go up 25 stories with all the heating, cooling, and hot water coming from the heat beneath our feet in geothermal heating and cooling. So I work with a number of clients in the geothermal and the air source heating. And then the third aspect of energy is transportation, right? So when you take a look at how do we move ourselves around and how do we get from here to there, mostly it's fossil fuels, either gas or diesel traditionally. And now the cost of electric vehicles are coming down so far, and the incentives are there that it's actually cheaper with the incentives now to buy an electric vehicle than it is to buy a comparable fossil fuel vehicle. And you're saving as much as 50 to 75% or more on fuel, plus maintenance savings because they don't have 2,000 moving parts like an internal combustion engine. You got less than 20 or about 20 moving parts. So you have much less maintenance, no oil changes, no transmission fluid to swipe out. And all of a sudden you have a very total cost of ownership opportunity. And I work with a number of clients. I work with municipalities and other government entities and for-profits on getting charging stations, looking at the incentives that are out there, how to put the technology together with the incentives and produce a cost-effective, cost-saving opportunity on vehicles as well. So I have some nonprofits, some schools, such as the Open Friends School, one of my favorites, who had looked at their 22 buildings and 11 bills and said, we looked at solar, we have too much shade, we can't do solar, there's too many buildings, it's too costly, we don't have any money, and found the way that they could do it because they had a little field on their property that they weren't using. We put the solar in a field. They didn't pay a dime out of pocket because of these public-private partnerships that we helped arrange. And so with no cost outlay, they allocated a little piece of the building, their space of their buildings, and now they supply 100% of their electricity from their solar field, 100% net. So during the night, they're still taking off the grid, but then they're producing excess during the day. So people like the Oakwood Friends School have a number of multifamily and mixed-use housing developers that we're working with on new designs. So we're incorporating solar with geothermal and ground source and air source heat pumps, as well as then charging stations and electric vehicles for their tenants. It's really quite an exciting time, Charlie.
I can tell, man, your energy is great. I love how you've broken it up into these different segments. My next question normally, Ron, is, what's next? But a lot of the stuff some people would say is next, batteries and microgrids. I mean, you're already doing it. So I did have one follow-up question on geothermal, geoexchange. Something I'm a fan of is, in the simplest of terms, what's been holding that technology back?
Yeah, so I think a bunch of different things, right? So one has been that there was a wave of action about 20 years or so ago where people were doing geothermal, but they were using a different technology. It was called kind of a pump and dump technology, right? So they would grab water from an aquifer or from wherever else, they bring it into a building, they take the heat out of it, and then they'd have to dump it back in, right? So there was this pump and dump. You'd pump it up and then you dump it, but you get the heat out of it. And a lot of those systems work really well, except many people didn't realize that they had to change the filters and that they would get sediment and they'd get other things that built up in the water that they had to keep an eye on and do the maintenance on. And because of that, a lot of the filters broke down. A lot of people didn't realize that they needed to do those filters. And it kind of gave a lot of folks a bad taste about geothermal because they couldn't get it to work right? And it was a costly thing up front. They were hoping to save so much money on operations, which they would have, but because they missed that maintenance piece, that was a real problem for the industry, and it kind of set them back. Right now, most folks are moving to closed loop systems. And so what happens with a closed loop is basically you have the same fluid that's just circulating round and round. So you don't have those sediment issues. You don't have those issues of particulates getting into your stream. It's just really the same fluid going round and round. So much less maintenance, much easier in terms of operations. But it's still costly up front, right? So that's really the problem. And where geothermal becomes most cost effective is when you're doing new construction. If you're doing new construction, you're really out of your mind at this point in our history to not have solar generating your electricity and not have that electricity powering your heating and cooling systems with geothermal. When you look at the economics, it costs you more up front, but between the incentives that are out there, the public-private partnerships, the ability to save on energy costs going forward, the total life cycle costs so dramatically less by doing it that way that you can really make a tremendous argument. Where the next phase comes in is fluctuating energy prices. Natural gas has been pretty cheap, so it was hard to compete against natural gas. Traditionally, those costs are now going up, where we see a lot of really cost-effective retrofit projects on geothermal now is for people who have oil or propane, where those costs are really high. It's a dirty fuel. What we also see is this movement. I do a lot of work in Westchester County, which is just north of New York City. It's 1 million people, basically, just north of New York City. And that county had a moratorium on natural gas because the pipelines basically couldn't handle any more gas into it. And so they had to freeze. And all of a sudden, one day, kind of had made the announcement that as of 2 months from now, we're not going to have any more gas applications. And everybody freaked out for a while. And what happened was the developers realized that, wait a second, okay, we can't get gas, so we can't do it the same way we've always been doing it. What can we do? Oh, air source heat pumps, geothermal heat pumps. Oh, we could place it with that. And between the incentives that are out there, the cash incentives, the tax incentives, actually we can bring our initial cost of ownership down so that it doesn't cost us that much more to do this. And then our energy costs are going to be 50 to 70 or 80% cheaper because we have these technologies in place. Yeah, we could do that. And now everyone in Westchester that's doing new construction is incorporating these technologies. So it's really been an interesting thing. The biggest challenge to geothermal, I think, at this point is the drilling. Is the fact that drillers who do well at water wells are not used to geothermal technology, so they haven't moved into that yet. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing because the more demand there is, the more people are going to come into it, the better drillers will have, the more mechanized, the more standardized stuff. And you can see that starting to happen. So for instance, out west, one of my clients, I do some other work where I help people develop markets. So one of my clients is Climate Master, which in the 50s when, as their quote is, when everyone else was looking up at Sputnik, they were looking down at the ground, at the heat beneath our feet, and they started doing geothermal. And they're a United States-based company. They're out in Oklahoma. And that company finds that when they're doing projects now out in the West and Midwest, because you have all these folks that were drilling for natural gas, all these drillers out there, their costs are so dramatically cheaper than it's been here in the Northeast because they have economies of scale. They have a trained workforce. They have the equipment. So their costs per foot are dramatically less. And I think that's what we're going to start to see now as we are making these transitions. We're going to see the economies of scale start to happen with geothermal. So the welding and the drill costs and the upfront costs are going to go down. The new federal bill brings added incentives to help everyone, whether you're a for-profit or non-profit now. So that's going to help geothermal going. And again, I would just urge that anybody that's doing new construction, you should really look at geothermal as the first phase of your heating and cooling system. The incremental costs are so small and the incentives are so great that really you can build for the same price that you would have built a traditional system, and your operating costs are going to go down dramatically.
I could have picked any one of these and gone deep on it. Thank you for teaching us more about geothermal, GeoExchange, something I was excited about. So let's do quickly talk. What's next? What else is exciting you? What's coming at us down the road in this green movement?
So first, I think, if you take a look around the world, everyone in the world is pretty much waking up to the fact that, look, we can't keep going on with fossil fuels. We got to make this transition, and it's happening in various different ways across the planet. Some top down, some bottom up, but really the technology costs have come down so far and making it so great. Solar is now the cheapest source of electricity on the planet. When you take a look at building a new solar plant versus anything else, solar is the way to go, right? Especially when you have a substantial amount of land that you can use. So first, what we're seeing is this transition from fossil fuels worldwide. Some of it is economic driven. Some of it is policy driven. In New York City, for instance, you have a local law that makes it you get penalized if you don't take certain steps to reduce your carbon footprints. New York State has the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which makes us move towards 100% clean energy across the board. And that's both for electricity, heating, cooling, and going to be in transportation too. So it's seeing this transition is coming. And I think the first thing that people need to recognize is, look, it's happening. And whether it happens to me this year, or it happens to me next year, within the next couple of years, either I start planning and making this transition, you're going to start hit with the penalties, because the next piece after the incentives are out there now, the next piece is going to get penalized if you don't take these steps. So first, I think we're seeing this awareness happen across the board. This transition is happening, needs to happen, it's going to happen. So a lot of people are saying, oh, well, it's happening, then how can I take advantage of it and maximize the benefit for my particular organization and make that happen now? So I think that's one thing that's going to happen. On the technology side, we're going to continue to see solar costs continuing to decrease, as they've been doing, dramatically. So, it's like almost 20% a year reductions. And, it's pretty incredible that now the cost of a panel, electricity used to be the solar panels cost were the main cost involved in doing a solar project. Now the cost of materials is really the least cost. It's the soft cost. It's the installation costs that are the higher pieces of that piece. So we're going to continue to see the prices of solar come down and more adoption of solar across the board. Definitely move on heating and cooling with air and ground source heat pumps. I think that's going to become very clearly the most cost-effective option, as well as a policy-driven piece with a lot of incentives out there now. But again, people are going to look at the cost if they don't do anything, with penalties coming down there. And then across the board, electric vehicles are just like taking off, right? You see everybody in their system now has one. So it was led by Tesla, but now everyone's got electric vehicles. One of the most exciting things, I think, is the Ford F-150 electric. And the reason for that is that you could take that Ford F-150 or a Nissan Leaf currently, and it has the technology to export energy as well as use energy to charge. So you can now run your house on your Ford F-150, right? And you can do similarly with a Nissan Leaf. If you have the right hardware and software, you can actually have the average house run off of those electric vehicles for 3 to 5 days. When you take a look at the ability to now have this distributed grid with electric vehicles supplying battery storage, I think that's going to be a game changer, because one of the constraints on the grid is, too much energy distributed in different ways. It's set up to be a generation source, not a receiver of energy. So it's the grid has to evolve. And one of the things that's going to make that grid evolution possible, I believe, is distributed storage with our electric vehicles being a main source, because we have so many vehicles all around. Why wouldn't we want to use that as well as drive with it, use it as an energy source and use that actually as a revenue source? So I think that's going to be one of the most exciting things that starts to happen.
It is an exciting future. I've been driving electric cars for 10 years, so I love it. I'm buying into everything you're saying. Just a few more questions here. Ron, what a fascinating conversation. But rapid fire, get to know you a little better. What do you think you're best at?
I'm best at seeing how to solve issues, especially when you have diverse pieces that need to come together. So my system science background really taught me that there really is a connection between things, and you just have to look at how to make those connections come together in a way that's synergistically positive, so that 1 and 1 it's always more than 2, right? Because if it was you and me separate, okay, 1 plus 1 is 2. But, when we come together and we have a positive relationship, we've got something more that goes on there. And I think that synergistic effects of bringing together different people in a positive way lifts all boats all at the same time. So I'm good at those synergies. I'm good at bringing people together and helping everyone achieve their goals and get to a higher place.
Tad, when it comes to a bucket list, what's 1 or 2 things on the bucket list? Any adventure, travel, write a book? What's on the bucket list?
Man. So I just did one of my bucket lists, which was to go to Iceland and see the Northern Lights and the Aurora Borealis. And my wife and I had an amazing time. Those who haven't gone to Iceland, I highly recommend it. If you go during the winter, you get the Northern Lights. You go during the summer, it's beautiful too. But waterfalls, glaciers, ice caves, lava, volcanoes, amazing spas, incredibly wonderful and tremendous. So that was on our bucket list, and now check. Got that one done for now, which is great. I think one of the things I'd really like to do is I'd love to get to Asia at some point. I've never been to Asia. I've heard such wonderful things about the people and the beauty there. And I think that's one of the things, Asia and or Australia and New Zealand. So that's ultimately a place that I want to be that I haven't been.
Super exciting, man. That trip to Iceland too. Wow. We're going to link over to your podcast. The last 2 things here, career advice and then some closing remarks. So is there anything you wish you'd have known a little earlier in your career?
Yeah, I think that I started off on the environmental policy side, which was definitely key for me and important for all the reasons. But the economics are really what drives so many people and so many decisions. So I think one of the things that if I had known earlier, I would have made the case for earlier that, it took me 10 years or so to get into was the fact that you can save people money with these technologies. So it's not just save the world. It's not save the earth. The message really is, look, put some money in your pocket, do the right thing and feel good. And so I think the economics would be the first thing that I wish I had known a little bit more about earlier and figuring that out.
Good advice. Let's say someone's listening to this podcast. They're getting super inspired by your story. Maybe they even want to line up with clean energy, clean tech, renewables. And what words of encouragement do you have for them if they're just now jumping in?
So I would say first, find some things that are hands-on that are exciting to you, right? Like certain people are excited by numbers, right? So that's their thing. Other people are excited by hands-on electrical work. Great, that's their thing. Other people are more interested in just making transitions off of fossil fuels, right? So first, figure out what you're most passionate about, what your skills are, what your abilities are, what your desires are, and where do you want to be. Then do either an internship or get a entry-level kind of position if you're just starting out as a young kid, and you could do that. Just really getting mentored about the particular place where you want to be and test yourself out and see if you want to do it. I initially thought I was going to be an accountant. I liked the debits and the credits. I was good at math. I went and studied accounting. And then I interned with an accountant. I realized that, you know what? I can't sit in this dark room and just do this stuff and count the pennies. I needed to be dealing with people. So for me, it was a tremendous experience. I wound up with a little different focus than I thought I was going to have. But the reality is go out and test and see and first identify if you do have a particular passion, where you think you want to go, and test it out and see. And if you do, step by step, you'll get there and really find your passion. The passion is what drives you. When you find your passion, ultimately the money will come. So.
Love it. Man, Ron, thank you for your time today. Everybody connect with Ron on LinkedIn. Check out the work he's doing, him and his team at EarthKind Energy Consulting. Check out his podcast. And Ron, thanks again, man.
Thank you, Charlie. Really appreciate it. Have a great day. Keep up the great work, man.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.